Hi guys, Will Terry here, and this is a video for your illustration clients. So what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people I find are working with small clients, clients that are starting up, clients that have never hired illustrators before, or maybe worked with a few of them, or work with them every now and then. I'm going to read a few questions from emails that I've gotten that kind of go along with this topic. I've been saving it up and been wanting to make this video for a long time. So just to be clear, this is a video that I'm making for you to actually send this link to a client to help educate them if they're kind of new. And so some of the questions that I've been asked are, how do you work with a client that hasn't hired an illustrator? How do I tell a client in a nice way how I like to work or the right way to work? How is it supposed to go when working with an author that wants me to illustrate their book? I have a client that thinks I'm demanding too much. What should I tell them? And then that letter went on to describe a situation. So again, this is for you if you're having a problem with a client, or you're starting up with a client and you don't really know. Maybe you don't even know how things should go. I don't know how to really put it other than that, how the working relationship should go. And what I'm going to do is tell you. Let me tell you a little bit about myself, because maybe you're a client, maybe you had an illustrator that sent this to you, and so you're watching it going, why am I watching this? And who is this Will Terry guy? So you can look me up. I've illustrated about 30 children's books for almost all the major publishers: Random House, Scholastic, HarperCollins, Simon Schuster, Albert Whitman, Klutz, Leapfrog. The list goes on. I'm sure Penguin. I'm sure I'm leaving some out. Um, and I've illustrated about 30 books. So I've been doing this for the last 20 years. And so what I'm going to do is tell you how it works in the professional publishing world, and how that relationship goes. And then that way you can structure your relationship with your illustrator, and kind of what go off of the expertise that's already been established. So, I mean, the publishing world has been in existence for over 100 years. So you kind of have to say, well, they probably dialed it in pretty good. And if it works for them, it can probably work for me. I'm not saying that you have to work this way, but I want to give you an idea of what goes on in that world. And this could also be, maybe your illustrator is more experienced, and this is what they're used to, and so it's good for you to know, from that aspect, what they're normally experiencing from their other clients. So in the traditional publishing world, when I get a contract, my publisher, my editor, usually gives me up to a year, usually somewhere between 9 months and a year, to start and finish a book. Now, I'm just telling you that because it does take a long time, and it's often hard to find the time to get that book fit into your schedule. If you're working with someone who is starting up, they probably have more time, so you might be able to work on a shorter time frame. I've heard of clients every now and then asking an illustrator to illustrate a book in 2 weeks, and that's because it's an emergency to them. They want to get this book out. Maybe they started on it late, and they want to get it out for Christmas or something, and they've got to get it, and now they only have 2 weeks for the illustrator, and that's a recipe for disaster. It takes me about 3 days to 5 days per spread, and if you're talking about a 32-page picture book where there's about 14 spreads, you can do the math. But that doesn't include sketch time. That doesn't include the back and forth time. It doesn't include revisions. It doesn't include a lot of things. But I figure about 5 days, a good week for each spread. Okay. And then I get paid in advance against royalties. Now, there are also buyouts where you pay a flat fee, but usually they pay higher if you do that. I've been paid anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 of an advance against a 5% royalty. And what that basically means is that you get the illustrator will get $10,000 to $20,000 as money that goes against. It's kind of a hard concept to explain. It's actually not that hard, but it's hard to get the right words. In other words, I'll get $10,000 before the books actually sell, because it takes time to print. Then when they start selling, I don't get any money from the first sales until, if you take out 5% of retail on each book that's sold, and add it up. When it adds up to $10,000, then the royalty kicks in and I start getting royalties again. So basically, the 5% adds up and pays back the 10,000 or the 15,000 or the 20,000, and then the illustrator starts making royalties for life. Okay, now that might be something that's really hard to figure out if you're a startup, or if you don't even know if you're gonna if your book's gonna sell very well, and so offering a flat fee might be more to your liking, might be more in your wheelhouse. I'm not going to tell excuse me, I'm not going to tell you what you should offer. That's between you and your illustrator. But just want to give you an idea of what they're paying in the national markets. And I would expect that if you're a startup, you're going to pay less than that. But it's a good idea to get an idea of how much. And if I figure that out, let's see. Yeah, so if I figure that out, if you take 10,000, it sounds like a lot of money. But if you divide that over 4 months, that's only $2,500 a month. And then if you factor that in with no benefits, no health insurance, that's not much money. So for me, I supplement my income with a lot of other things. I teach at the university. I teach online. I do a lot of indie projects. I do a lot of other freelance that goes along with it. So to boost my income. But some people, the reason I tell you that is sometimes people will offer like $1,000 to do a children's book, or $1,500 or even $500, and to them it's a lot of money, because it is. I mean, to a lot of people it's like to scratch up $500 or $1,000, but you've got to be realistic and know how much time it takes an illustrator to actually illustrate that. And so if you're going to pay, the less you're going to pay, you have to be realistic and understand you're going to attract an illustrator that is really, really, really ranked a ranked beginner. And your artwork, your quality of your artwork is going to go down based on how much you're paying, how much you're willing to offer. If you're going to offer $500 or $1,000, expect to get artwork that does not compete on a national level. If you want to get better artwork, you're going to probably have to come up with a lot more than that. Let's talk about payment. So what most publishers do is they will offer a 1/3 signing. They call it a signing bonus. I don't know why it's a bonus. It's part of the initial money that comes that's in the offer. So you get 1/3 payment up front, but usually most of the time there's a contract involved. The contract is signed. Oh, that's another thing. I didn't put it on my list, but you should get a signed contract. The two of you should sign a contract on what both of you expect, who owns what. The artwork, the original artwork, is retained by the illustrator. In the national publishing markets, they never keep your artwork. So, and I hear that a lot, where it's like I'll hear my client wants to keep my artwork, and what should I tell them? They think it's going to be theirs because they're paying me. You don't get to keep the artwork unless you pay extra for that artwork. Now that's negotiable. That's between you and the illustrator. But just know that in the national markets where they're paying these higher amounts, they're also not getting the artwork for those higher amounts. So that's something to think about. The illustrator created that art. That should be theirs. What we sell as illustrators, we sell the right to use that art for the children's market. So in your contract, it should state that the illustrator can't go and sell that artwork to be used on another children's book, to protect you as the client. So that should be reflected in the contract, but that they can keep and own and sell that artwork, like to a private collector or something like that. So back to the payment: 1/3 up front, 1/3 on completion of sketches, and 1/3 on completion of finishes. Some people do half up front and half after the completion of the final artwork. And I've had a few times where an illustrator will tell me, well, my client doesn't want to spend anything up front. They want to see some sketches first. And what I would say is if I'm talking to you, the client, I would remind you that you called them. They didn't call you and get this chain in motion. So in my opinion, you should bear the risk. If it's this handoff thing where, do I get the money first or sketches or money? I'll pay you money after the sketches. I really feel like that's something that you called them. They didn't call you, so you should offer that little bit of money in good faith to get the project started. But you hold on to the last bit of money because you want to protect yourself as the client. You don't want to spend money and give them the whole chunk. I would never do that. I would never give the illustrator everything up front, or you might never hear from them again. That's just not good business. Okay, let's talk about art direction. Okay, an art director is someone who, like it sounds, gets to make decisions on art. Um, Now, good art directors hire the right illustrator. And another mistake that I see from a lot of startups, a lot of authors that want to hire an illustrator to illustrate their book, one of the biggest mistakes is not looking at enough portfolios and going with the first warm body that says yes and getting the wrong illustrator for the job. So, in other words, you have a style of art that you have in your head, you have a vision of what you want the artist to do, but that artist can't do what you want. It doesn't not reflect in their portfolio, but for some reason in your mind you think, well, I'll show them this art style that I really like, and they'll just magically be able to create it. That's not how it works. You need to find the portfolio that reflects exactly what you want. If you hire the artist with the portfolio that shows you the work that you want, that's the work you're going to get. And if you do the opposite or anything but that, you're going to be disappointed, and it's probably going to cause a lot of problems, and the project's definitely not going to go smoothly. So the first thing is hire the right illustrator. Hire the illustrator that's doing what you want them to do. The second thing on that is understand that they are the artist. And one thing that's really important to know is that good art directors, the best art directors in the world, hardly do any art directing at all. It's not the same as hiring a carpenter. If you wanted to hire a carpenter to build you a set of stairs, you could say, I want those stairs here. You could even specify how many steps you want. Maybe you want more steps so that they're easier to climb. Or you want them to go up steeper. You can determine the width. There's all kinds of things you can do. A carpenter, and forgive me, because there are some carpenters who are artists, but there are a lot of carpenters who are basically just there to solve a functional problem. And that's what I'm talking about. There are a lot of carpenters who are artists. So if you're a carpenter and you're an artist, don't be offended by this. I'm just using this as an example. But when you hire a carpenter and you tell them what to do, it's very different than hiring an illustrator. The idea of hiring an illustrator is you're hiring an artist that needs to be able to be free to make decisions. And when you handcuff them, and if you take them by the hand and tell them everything that you want them to do, what you're going to do inevitably is you're going to bump into asking them to break design principles and design rules. And what that's going to do is it's going to make the art that you want not art. And in their mind, in the artist's mind, who is offended, quite frankly, by the decisions that you're making that will go against design principles that they've been taught in school, they'll lose interest in the project. I know this because this has happened to me early on. I started out with very beginner clients and worked my way up. And the interesting thing is, the farther up I worked, the more hands-off the art directors are, and the more free I've been able to be to create the kind of artwork that I want. And magically, I start winning awards. I start selling more books. I get more attention because the artwork that I'm creating is I'm free. I've been released to do what I want. Now flip that and imagine that you send your manuscript, and I know that I'm really mostly talking to authors, and some of this might not apply, so forgive me for that. Authors that want illustrators to illustrate their book, I hear about those probably the most. But imagine if you send your manuscript to the illustrator and they send it back with red marks all over it and say, I think you'd be better to change this word to this and that word to that. And you'd probably go, well, I'm not hiring you to change the words. Your job is to do the art. That's right. Their job is to do the art. So let them do the art. Let me give you an example. We'll take Mary had a little lamb. So the line, Mary had a little lamb whose fleet was white as snow. Okay, so the illustrator paints the lamb black. As an art director, that's when you need to step in. Okay, because in the text it clearly says whose fleece was white as snow. Okay, but let's take it. Let's say that the illustrator paints a bow, and it's agreed. It's in the sketch. And we'll talk about that in a second. Well, let's say there's a bow on the lamb, and the illustrator paints it blue and you want it to be purple. That's where you're overstepping your bounds. Color decisions should be the illustrators unless they break and don't illustrate the text. If it's a personal choice, that shouldn't matter to you at all. That's just a personal choice, and that's if you start injecting too many of those, the illustrator is going to lose interest. They're one of the reasons that they're probably accepting your assignment in the first place. And if you're not paying that much, if you're paying a really low amount, is they're trying to build a portfolio of published work, of professional work, and they're trying to work their way up. And as soon as they feel that you're taking over and controlling them like a marionette, they're going to lose interest. It's not going to be art. They're not going to care anymore, and it's going to look. The artwork is going to be diminished. Trust me on that. I have flat files full. In fact, I burned a lot of paintings where the art directors were way too heavy-handed. It wasn't art. I didn't care about it, and some of it was very damaging to my career. But I persevered through that. That's a whole other issue and a whole other story. If you go to an SCBWI event, which you probably won't, but if you're an author, you probably do know about that. And even if you're not, if you're a client and you're not an author trying to get a book published, maybe it's another type of project. Editors will this question will come up at SCBWI events, and what will happen is an author will raise their hand and say, well, what if I want my illustrator to have my vision, and I want to convey my vision to them, and I should have that right, shouldn't I? This question always comes up at every single SCBWI event, and what will inevitably happen is an editor will field the question, or if it's an editor giving the talk, they'll say something like this. They'll say, the first thing is that your viewers, the consumer of the artwork or the book or whatever it's going to be, has no idea what your vision is, has no idea what the artist's vision is. But when they see the art, that's when it's going to either impact them or not. So what you're dealing with is apples and oranges. You have a vision, the artist has a vision. Your vision isn't any better than the artist's. It's just different. And so by you injecting your vision onto the artist, again, you're taking them out of their job and you're controlling them like a marionette. The other thing that they would say is simply, and I've heard it just simply stated like this, if you're that concerned about creating your own vision, then learn to become an illustrator and do it yourself. And that's what editors will tell authors all the time. Okay, so let's look at one last thing. I think there's one last thing on here. Yes. Let's talk about scope creep. Okay, so scope creep is basically when the scope of the project increases to a point where the illustrator could not have satisfied the assignment from the very beginning. So let me give you an idea of that. So again, we'll go back to our example. Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. Okay, so the illustrator, and let me just say that the general way that people work is the illustrator will send in sketches first. So if you're working with an illustrator and they're talking about just jumping right into paintings, then the illustrator's working wrong. So for you illustrators out there, this is for you too. You need to make sure that you are doing sketches, or what they call pencils, first. So you do a round of sketches where you sketch out the whole book, where you sketch out the whole project, and you send those sketches in to the art director or to the author, to whoever's in charge of your project, whoever's paying you, whoever wants you to send those in. And you can email those. That's how most of them are done these days. Send a PDF or and email that in. You send sketches in, and then that's where you as the client gets to make feedback, gets to send feedback. And in your feedback, you should be very, very detailed. If you make a few quick comments, but in your mind you're expecting something totally different, and you don't get it, a lot of times it can be traced back to bad communication on both parts, not just on the client, but on the illustrator. So everybody in this process needs to have really, really good communication Be very honest. If you don't understand something, ask questions. Um, and that's going to avoid a lot of problems right there. Take lots of notes, write things down. When I send my pencils or my sketches into my editor, it comes back with they'll send a PDF back with little they look like post-it notes, but there's something that you can actually make in a PDF. Little colored areas where they will write, 3 or 4 or 5 sentences about so a change that they want, a revision. And usually those revisions, again, have to do with the content of the story and not with their personal vision. Often I'll get spreads back with no comments on them at all. So there's a lot of spreads. I would say about half of my spreads are good to go right from the very first sketch, and probably half of them have little tweaks. Some of them have major overhauls. If I haven't understood this story exactly, or if they have some insight into what would make it better, sometimes their comments are great. Sometimes I don't always agree with them, but that's part of the process of working with an editor. Um, and then I make revision sketches and I send the revisions in, and then we go to finals after that. Usually, sometimes there's a third round, but the third round is usually a few tiny little tweaks to those pencil sketches, and a lot of times they'll say you don't even have to send us another sketch, you can just go to final, but change this little thing or take this out or put that in. Where scope creep, I'm going to come back to this, where scope creep comes in is where there's no possible way the illustrator could have solved the sketch the first time around because you as the client didn't give them the whole assignment. So let me give you an example. Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. So they send the sketches in, and then you decide that it would be cuter with a farmhouse in the background. So then the illustrator has to go back and do another sketch and put a farmhouse in. Now, this is assuming that you never told them that in the beginning. Um, and that's called scope creep, and that's not fair. It's not fair to the illustrator to dangle the carrot of money out in front of them while you're adding pieces of the assignment. Let's say you get the sketch back and then you say, well, now it would look better with trees and with flowers in there. So they draw it with trees and flowers, and then they send it back. And then you say, on that well, I think it would look nicer if you put shake shingles in there instead of a whatever kind of roof they put on there. That's called scope creep. It's not fair. That means that you're unorganized, and again, you're adding time, but you're not offering to pay more. So you illustrators out there should be charging for that. And that never, by the way, that does not happen with my my clients, my publishing clients. It every now and then will happen in the educational market, but it doesn't happen with the large publishers with picture books because they're organized. They know what the project is. They respect me. They respect my time. They understand that $10,000 or $15,000 isn't a ton of money to do a picture book, and so they back off and they don't insert their personal wishes in there, especially if they didn't put it in the initial. And if they do, there have been times where they will offer to pay a little bit more money, a few hundred extra dollars here, a few hundred extra dollars there. Sorry about that. That's our mistake. We forgot to include that. And for your pain and suffering, because you're going to have to go back and make this new drawing, here's a little bit of extra money to go along with that. So anyway, I hope that this helps you understand the process. I hope it helps you understand more how illustrators and publishers work. And if you go by this, and if you really try to have good communication, I think that's really where you're going to avoid most of the problems. If you have an issue and you're the illustrator, learn how to communicate. Write a nice email. Don't have attitude, but be very explanatory. Explain to your client why you think something is fair or not fair. The gray area really is in those revisions. How many revisions should you be asked to do? I would tell you that, like I said before, most of the time it really happens where there's one set of revisions, and they're usually minor. Again, they're usually things that really pertain to the content of the story. And not to personal wishes, and then we go to final paintings. Let's say you get the final painting and you just don't like the artwork at all. That's an art director problem. That's a you problem if you're the client, because that means you hired the wrong illustrator. It's very rare if you hire an illustrator that has a very consistent portfolio, meaning that if you look at 10 of their pieces and they look like they're all done in the same style, that they're going to give you your work in a completely different style. Now, that doesn't mean that it can't happen, but it's very rare. If you hire somebody who has pieces in lots of different styles, and then you get a style that maybe you liked one of those styles, but you didn't like all the others, that's because you're hiring a beginning illustrator. And that's something that can definitely happen when you go the budget route. Um, and so for that's a tough one. My only advice to avoid that is to hire somebody who has a really consistent portfolio. So as for you illustrators out there, if your portfolio isn't consistent, you're probably not ready to do a whole picture book. You will probably struggle, as I did on my first one, um, getting consistency in your artwork. And so that's the thing that you should be working on and striving towards the most. I hope this video has helped you. And if you want to reach me, you can always check out my links right down here. Check out my blog, check out my website, check out my classes, my online classes at svslearn.com. And I will check you later and see you on my next video.